I've got Manny Navarro from the Athletic on. We're going to talk a little Mario Cristobal today, and if there's anything that is more polarizing in college football, it's how good of a coach Mario Cristobal is, or just how all aspects considered. But one thing that's certainly not in doubt is just the recruiting efforts. Watching him, I remember a couple of years ago, Florida State finished at 5-7, and they had the number 20 recruiting class, and they were the only team inside of the top 20, right on that edge, to have a losing record. And so my big pitch was, well, look, he was the best of all the losers, right? Norvell's recruiting was the best of everybody. Everybody else ahead of them finished above 500, and so he essentially out recruited his record. He was the only one to do that. Mario has taken out recruiting his record like to a completely different level, and has certainly been able to sell the hope of we are turning things around and we are getting better and we are moving this thing forward. And the recruiting, despite the results being not great on the field, has just still been tremendous at Miami. I mean, we mentioned Cormani McLean in another episode. I mean, they're a Cormani McLean flip away from having two back-to-back top 5 classes, despite the struggles on the field. So, what makes them so good at recruiting?
Well, I think I had a long conversation with Mario about this up in Charlotte before we left, and talked a lot about just coming back to Miami and leaving what he had at Oregon. He had Phil Knight's war chest up there basically to work with, as well as everything else as part of Oregon's collective, and he left a really good job. You see what Dan Lanning has turned Oregon into in terms of winning. And Dan Lanning's a great defensive coach, a guy who I think he's got everything you want in a head coach. And he's taken him to places Mario hasn't. But I think a lot of it is just because of the resources. Well, Mario wouldn't have taken this Miami job if he wasn't guaranteed he'd have the resources he needed in today's game to be able to get the kind of players that you need to get. And we've known for a long time, TJ, that NILs existed for a long time before it existed, right? So Miami didn't buy players back in the day. They didn't have the money. They were small little private schools just happy to be in the ACC. That's the way they operated. And maybe they had a little bit of money here and there for guys. Well, guess what? Now they've got a lot of money. And there's a lot of people backing Mario, and that makes doing your job a lot easier. Now, I will say it's not just the money. Mario, you have to be able to get kids to believe in you, right? You have to get kids to be able to like you in today's game, to want to come play for you. Mario does that, whether he's got NIL backing or not. That's something he's always done. He did it when he was an assistant at Rutgers for Greg Schiano. He did it at Alabama with Nick Saban. He did it at Oregon. He recruited well there. He did it at FIU, right? He identified some good players, and FIU had their best years under Mario Cristobal. So he knows what he's doing. He's a program builder. He's not an X's and O's guy. I think Mike Norvell is much more of that than Mario is. Mario's an offensive line coach who knows how to recruit, which is basically the same thing Butch Davis was, except Butch Davis was a defensive line coach. And you look at the greatest Miami team that was ever assembled, Butch Davis built it. Didn't necessarily coach it to a national championship, but he built it. And Mario Cristobal is a builder and an offensive line coach, and he's doing the same thing here.
Yeah, it's funny to watch the narrative around that, money change, and every recruiting battle you lose is because they overpaid
Right.
down the road. Every recruiting battle you win is just because that guy bleeds the colors of your program, and it is funny. But you're right. Like everybody's paying, right? Ohio State's paying, Oregon's paying. And, that gets no matter who the coach is at Oregon, like it's all Phil Knight's money, right? And so everybody's paying, but you still have to get kids to buy in because they're paying down the road too. It's not just Miami that spends money on recruiting. So, on the other side of the coin, not the best when it comes to the results on the field. Now, this is a prove it year. There's a lot of expectations we'll talk about in a minute. But when I look at that opening game, which we talked about a little bit earlier, between Florida and Miami, there's a national narrative, I think, as kind of an outsider from both programs, around Napier that doesn't seem to exist around Mario. Mario has one more win over the 2 years than Billy does. But, when you factor in, well, Mario's doing the ACC, Billy's doing the SEC, there's a narrative that, like, Napier's on the hot seat and maybe coaching for his job in that first game, but that doesn't seem to exist around Mario at all. What do you think that is?
Well, Mario signed a 10-year deal, and the University of Miami, everybody who was funding the NIL and supporting Mario is doing it because it's Mario. I don't know that they would have necessarily shown up and contributed the same way if Mario Cristobal wasn't the coach. If Manny Diaz was still here, I don't know that Manny Diaz gets the same war chest to work with that Mario Cristobal does. And, I think a lot of it has to do with him and this being a plan of the people who run the University of Miami now. They knew that they needed to rehabilitate their image. And who better to do it than the guy who represents Miami, right? Mario Cristobal represents Miami. He's Cuban born, Miami bred, and former Hurricane. And so that's why he has all the support that he does. Billy Napier doesn't have didn't sign a 10-year deal when he took the Florida job. He's a guy who came over from Louisiana and was expected to make the program better than what Dan Mullen had it. And yet we've gone through 2 seasons and they're not recruiting at the same level that Miami is. They had the Jaden Rashada fiasco a couple years ago, which is still playing out now legally. And their program has just sort of cratered a little bit here in the last year, whereas Miami at least improved from struggling their first year under Mario to getting to a bowl game in year 2. And again, Billy Napier, much tougher conference. I think a much tougher job. You have to compete and recruit against the Georgia Bulldogs and play them every single year. When you're losing that rivalry, it does you no favors on the recruiting trail. You got to play Florida State every single year. Florida State went 13-0 last year before the Orange Bowl. Again, it does not make you look very good. And so he's got the tougher job of the two. But I think for Billy, you got to show something this year. As tough as the schedule is, you got to be able to hold on to recruits. Mario Cristobal did, despite the sad finish that Miami had towards the end of the year as Tyler Van Dyke struggled. And so that's the difference right now, I think, between these two coaches.
Pretty big expectations for Mario, and it seems like the support and the buy-in from both donors and the university exists there, for Mario much more than maybe up the road a little bit in Gainesville. But really big expectations this year, 9.5 over/under win total. We talked in a previous video, like the expectation has to be to be in Charlotte one way or the other. And then there's playoff talk, right? And they've got just as good of an over/under as Clemson and Florida State do in the conference, kind of the big dogs there. If this year is disappointing, does that buy-in, does that support, does it start to diminish, or what are your thoughts on, man, if you can't live up to kind of the expectation this year, if they go 7-5 or something, does the heat turn up a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly people will start to wonder, hey, did we make a mistake if Mario Cristobal and Miami win 8 games and drastically underachieve compared to what everybody's expecting? I think without question. That said, I think if they get to 9 or 10 wins and let's say they don't get into the playoff, there will be disappointment, but I don't think people are going to throw their hands in the air and say, oh, he's terrible. He's never going to get it done here. I think everything is going to be viewed as progress because of where this program was at. Look at the last 20 years. It has been a long time since this program has been relevant. Even the 1 year, TJ, that they won 10 games in 2017, a lot of that was smoke and mirrors, right? Like Mark Richt got away with some gutsy late wins that got them to 10. And then they go on the road to Pittsburgh and get totally exposed. They go to the ACC championship game, get totally exposed, and play in the Orange Bowl and get totally exposed. So I think Mario is building this differently. This is not hey, we're going to be good for a year and then we're going to suck again. Like, this is about turning the University of Miami into a perennial playoff program. And that's really what Mario is doing. And it all starts up front, offensive and defensive line. They do not beat Clemson if Mario is not recruiting at the level that he's recruiting at last year. They just don't. They won that game at the line of scrimmage. TJ, the teams that win the championships nowadays, yes, they throw the ball a lot and put up a bunch of points and score a bunch of points. But when push comes to shove, where do they win? At the offensive and defensive line. And that's why Mario Cristobal has a chance to really be successful at Miami, because he is ingrained in that thinking coming from the Nick Saban school of football.
Opposite side of that, if they don't live up to expectations, obviously there's some concerns. But if they do and they sneak into the playoff, they're already recruiting at a top 5 level. They're already, counted as kind of the big boys of the ACC with Florida State and Clemson. if they are able to get to Charlotte and whether they win there or they backdoor their way into the playoff, I mean, what does that do? I know they're not building for just this one year, but what does that do for the program if they can kind of live up to the expectations for the first time in a while?
Yeah, I think it just justifies Mario's hiring. You don't have people questioning now what were they thinking. They don't question his decision making in games, because in the end he got them to where they're supposed to be, where Miami thinks it's supposed to be every single year. And I think the payoff is top five recruiting class and more transfers and more people wanting to come play for Miami next year. Somebody's going to want to replace Cam Ward. Somebody's going to want to replace Damian Martinez. Somebody's going to want to come in and play receiver for Mario. It's just the way it is. It's once you get to that point and you cross the threshold and you've got the financial backing that you need in this game, you can really take off and be successful. Oregon took them a long time after they kind of hit the reset button and went through Taggart and some other guys to get back to this point. They had their growing pains, but they were there. Michigan took them a long time. Jim Harbaugh took them forever to finally win a championship, right? But he did. He got them there. I think those are sort of examples of what ultimately the path could be for Miami. It could be a 7 to 8 year journey before they win a championship again. But if Mario gets them to the playoff this year, it will validate all of the spending and all of the work that people behind the scenes have put into making this program good again.
Manny, where can people follow you? Where can they find more of your work?
You can read me at The Athletic. They can follow me on Twitter at Manny_Navarro. And they can listen to me on the Wide Right podcast. It's downloadable anywhere. You can also go to my YouTube page, Wide Right Pod, and find me there.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy.
Anytime.